Hello, and welcome to a San Francisco Conservative on KSFO Radio. I'm Tom Martin, your co-host. I'm here on the East Coast, and my co-host, author David Parker, is right there in San Francisco. David is the author of three great books, Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and Rome 476. David is a true Renaissance man, and I always find our conversations thought-provoking and happy to share them with you. David, welcome back. And we were talking recently, always great to see you, sir. And we were talking recently about these big ticket items that just balloon our national debt. Um, it's interesting when we think back to, the great presidents. We have a presidential election going on or coming right up in November, obviously, when a lot of people think, we certainly have the founding fathers. And I know you've written about the founding fathers quite extensively in your books. We think of great presidents like FDR and Lyndon Johnson and so on. And they brought in, big government. And I know that sort of has a bad name. But what are your thoughts about all those kinds of programs and agencies and, big programs like Social Security and Medicare?
All right, that's a good question. I want to say, in the last program I talked about the hidden costs of progressivism. For example, that every taxpayer is paying at least $6,000 toward the national debt, and you don't see it. And if you have health insurance, you're paying at least $800 a month more than if it were a market phenomenon. And if you and the war, and the war on poverty and the big huge programs that are costing you at least $6,000. What did I say? That's $6,000 a month. Health insurance, $9,600 a month. If you're a parent paying for private school when your property taxes already are paying for public school, you're paying another $10,000 at least per person, per child. And then you would think Social Security is not such a big deal, but it's 15% of your income. And you're preventing a young person starting off from saving money to go buy a house, for example. But it doesn't have to be 15%. 10% is sufficient. But it just it's not self-paying like it should be. And because it can't be. They promise so much that they should raise Social Security tax to about 20% or 25% to pay for it, because otherwise you're paying for it by borrowing. But 10% is sufficient. If you're making $50,000 a year, 10% is $5,000. Just put that away in compound interest in a U.S. Treasury, for example, at hopefully, or something that pays about 5% interest. Compounded after 40 years, that's about $600,000 you'd have in your bank account. 50 years, that compounding goes up to about $1.1 million. You start at 20, you retire at 70, you should have $1.1 million in your account in cash. That would be a 10%. So you're paying that extra 5% of $50,000, $2,500 a year for life. You're paying extra and you're not getting that much for Social Security. But Social Security is a really important issue, not thing. Franklin Roosevelt ran for office in 1932, saying, "This is what I'm going to do if I'm elected president in 1933. Social Security was wanted, all kinds of things. The Supreme Court said, no, you're not. 33, 34, it's unconstitutional. It's nothing in the Constitution that says government can take care of all the people. The Founding Fathers gave us a nation with freedom from government. And they said it's possible because Americans are very responsible. We're a Jeffersonian democracy. It means you can count on people to take care of themselves. It's what Alexis de Tocqueville was most admired about our nation in democracy in America, how responsible American citizens were, unlike European citizens anywhere else in the world. In a back Kentucky log cabin, people are reading the newspaper, discussing international affairs. Nowhere in Europe are farmers discussing international affairs, reading the newspaper. So you don't need... You can count on the citizens, and every citizen has the vote in this country, Jefferson says. I don't care what your social background is. I don't care what your wealth is. Everybody gets to vote in this country. You can count on them. You can count on Americans. As a teacher, I can tell you, you can count on the parents and on the students, even if they're wrong at a particular point in their life. You correct them, and people go on. People get the message. So they find Roosevelt just scared the Chief Justice Cardoso of the Supreme Court into passing it. Literally frightened him, and they passed it. He says, if you don't pass this, I'm going to pack the Supreme Court with 6 justices, and we're going to end checks and balances in this country. I'm taking over this country because the Depression is so serious, we can't have a democracy and end the Depression at the same time. And the Supreme Court said no. And there's some perverseness to this. They knew, he knew, or Social Security people knew, that most people didn't live to be 65 in 1933. It was closer to 60 was the average age, or even less. They knew they would never have to pay out. That's really perverse. And I can say something that people are not used to hearing, but the Great Depression started in 1929 after the stock market crash in 28. And it lasted 4 years, 29, 30, 31, 32. That's about, no depressions last more than 4 years. The market eventually corrected. And in the beginning of 1933, the Depression was over. And President Roosevelt campaigned in 32, this is what I'm going to do. And he forgot to look that the economy wasn't in depression anymore. Not only did he prolong the Depression another 8 years until World War II, 1941, he took unemployment rate of 15% during the Depression and dropped it down to 25% during the Great Depression, during his term. People say today, all economists, including Paul Krugman, is that finally been a consensus that Roosevelt caused the Great Depression. He didn't cure it.
Wow, that's pretty dramatic. Yeah.
Pretty dramatic.
So what FDR did was not really a continuation of those great American values, that the Tocqueville noticed and so on. It was sort of turning that on its head, it sounds like.
We flipped it. Perfect. We flipped it. 1933, we flipped the vision of the Founding Fathers of freedom from government to freedom with government. And now we can't get out of it. Yeah. So the United States is on their way out because of that.
And, I'll just tell our audience that you're making these observations not just as a dedicated student of history and economics, but as a long-time investor. You've been an investor for what, half a century, more or less. So you're speaking from experience. You've seen these cyclical trends, right?
Yeah, my thumb is on the pulse of the economy, and you begin to see cycles in business. They repeat. Well, they repeat in political cycles, repeat also. Social cycles repeat. And in my books, I give examples of today's problems from 5th century Athens, 1st century Rome, 18th century Age of Enlightenment. Same problems solved by people who are on a much higher level of civilization than we are today.
Yeah.
That people don't realize we're at a low civilizational point.
I love the historic examples that you include in all 3 of your books. So we'll continue the conversation in just a minute. This is a San Francisco Conservative. I'm Tom Martin, in with my co-host, author David Parker, here on KSFO Radio. And we will continue the conversation in just a moment.
Meet David Parker, a lifelong native of San Francisco, a true Renaissance man, educator, investor, and entrepreneur, jazz musician. David Parker is a San Francisco conservative. That's the title of his second book and this show, one that reminds us all just how precious our democracy really is. He's an optimist, and some of his views may surprise you. Parker's writing reminds us all that the study of history provides important perspective on current challenges. You can learn more about David Parker's writing by visiting davidparkeressays.com. On the website, you can also download a free chapter from Parker's book, A San Francisco Conservative. The impact of Parker's writing extends far beyond the city by the bay. Be sure to visit davidparkeressays.com to learn more and download a free chapter from his book. That's davidparkeressays.com.
Hello, and welcome back to a San Francisco Conservative here on KSFO Radio. I'm Tom Martin, longtime journalist out here on the East Coast, and I am joined by my co-host, author David Parker, right there in San Francisco. David is the author of Income and Wealth, San Francisco Conservative, and most recently, Rome 476. His columns are also featured quite often in the Epoch Times, Bay Area edition, and nationwide. And we are talking about government programs and how to get a handle on all this. Hey, David, let's pick it up where we left off. And one of those areas that has really gotten out of control, I think we would all agree, is healthcare, the cost of healthcare in America. We all, as Americans, we pride ourselves on being, the number one nation on earth and so on. But when it comes to cost, I mean, maybe we are in terms of cost, but let's look at the quality of healthcare and how did it get this way? I know in your books you've written about the value of free market forces when it comes to economics and Adam Smith and the invisible hand and so on. But how did things get so out of hand when it comes to healthcare in America?
Well, I think I've said it before, but when government steps into a market, the market starts to disintegrate. We don't have a market for health care or health insurance. It's completely prepaid health care. You're paying $1,000 when you should be paying $200. I talked to one of my project managers, a contractor, one of my building sites, and talking about what we're saying as this health insurance is $1,000. He stops me. I'm paying $2,000 a month health insurance. He told me, I have a family, and I said, I couldn't believe it. So if you're paying $1,000, you're paying $9,600 a month more than you should. If you're paying $1,000, you add another $12,000. That's $20,000 a year.
You might as well just be paying for your health care directly.
Yeah, and nobody's bargaining the price. So you can't have a situation where nobody's bargaining the price, because then nobody cares. Nobody cares.
What about going, again, here I am in Connecticut. Why don't I just drive over to New Jersey and, purchase my health care insurance in New Jersey?
Very good. I'm glad you reminded me of that. I believe that the cost of health insurance in Pennsylvania is 3 times less than in New Jersey. Wow. In this country, in violation of interstate commerce, you can't buy health insurance from another state.
It's crazy.
You politicize anything. That's when the citizens get involved in the market, and they tell the market what to do. That's what the citizens will do. You can't do that. And so we have medical tourism. You have people flying to Mexico. You can go to a first-rate hospital with American-trained doctors in Mexico. Mexico is not a completely poor country, and you can for a third of the cost. Or you can go to Singapore, get it done for a third of the cost. In Singapore, the hospitals advertise, we guarantee you will not get staph infection. We are so clean and so thorough. And our doctors are trained in America just like, so they should just have charter jets ready to go, at the airports for people who want health care.
Wow. Amazing. Well, certainly there must be something good about Obamacare. I mean, he was a great president. And, in the old days, I know homelessness is still quite an issue there in San Francisco. In the old days, you might have the hobos hopping, a freight train or something like that, but they were left to fall between the cracks. And now, I'd like to think we have a more compassionate society that, so we make sure that everyone, is not lacking medical care. I mean, isn't that really a good thing?
Yeah, now we've made sure that everyone does fall through the cracks. Before it was arbitrary. Now, definitely, if you're a homeless person, you would definitely get falling through the cracks. We're giving you, San Francisco spends up to $1 billion for homeless. And it only increases the homeless. We have 8,000 homeless here, and nothing is being done. Because they're not, you have to label the problem correctly, and then the solution becomes a little more clear. Homelessness is people coming to lay down to die. That's all. That's what it is. They don't want to go on anymore. And so we have no obligation to give them $100,000 a year in services. The homeless, like the hobos, should be living on the outskirts of town. And if they don't if you don't want them living with the campfire and roasting hot dogs, provide, a deserted military base or a factory that's not being used, and put cots there, and provide a kitchen, provide medical, even health service. We can take care of people, but they have to be dispersed throughout the area, not concentrated in one city and not concentrated in one or two neighborhoods, which makes it even worse.
Yeah, well,
we're not treating them correctly.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Again, I am here living, very close to New York City, and in the news recently, New York Mayor Eric Adams came out and said, we don't want to be a sanctuary city anymore. Like I said, I used to think we're talking about compassion here. Oh my gosh, let's not be uncompassionate. But he just said, we're overwhelmed with people coming in, immigrants coming in. And, he just said it doesn't make fiscal sense, and he's quite the Democrat, obviously. So it doesn't make fiscal sense anymore to be a quote unquote sanctuary city. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that a little bit.
There's an element of the hidden costs of progressivism. Again, San Francisco has had big conventions canceled. I think the whole convention of dentists from around the nation canceled because they're afraid to walk around the streets. They were actually getting harassed at the Moscone Convention Center in San Francisco. So one of the hidden costs is that all the merchants who depend on and the hotels who depend on tourism are being deprived. That's one of the hidden costs. It's one of the classics in economic theory, in fact. After a riot, if all the windows in the city are broken, the thought was, that provides all kinds of employment for window makers or window repair people. But people forget that the money spent to replace those windows would have been spent on something else. Maybe you would have bought new clothes for your children, or maybe you would have bought a car. Oh, so the car dealers go broke. The tailors go broke. Everybody goes broke because you're spending money that wouldn't have been spending on fixing windows.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I tell you what, we'll pick up on that a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. We'll pick up on that in just a minute, and I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about, I've seen you around San Francisco with your trademark hat. You're a man who wears many hats, and we're going to talk about that in our third and final segment. We'll be right back.
In the heart of the vibrant city by the bay, meet a voice that's challenging the status quo. David Parker, author of A San Francisco Conservative and Rome 476. David Parker, a true San Franciscan with a conservative vision for the future, is a voice that resonates with our nation's founding fathers. Freedom from government, not with government. For 40 years, he taught in San Francisco's inner city schools, acquired a large real estate portfolio, and worked as a professional musician. The Dave Parker Sextet performs every week. It's time for a fresh perspective, one that values fiscal responsibility, individual responsibility. David Parker is not only an academic, his thumb is on the pulse of the economy. He brings real solutions to all the problems affecting our nation. Learn more at davidparkeressays.com and get a free chapter to any of his books. A San Francisco Conservative, Rome.
Hello and welcome back to A San Francisco Conservative. I'm Tom Martin, longtime journalist, having produced for ABC, CBS, CNN, and a few other news organizations out here on the East Coast. And my co-host is author David Parker. They are right there in San Francisco, and we are happy to be joining you on KSFO Radio. David is the author of Income and Wealth, A San Francisco Conservative, and Rome 476. And David, a few minutes ago, you were talking about, and when we were talking about the cost of healthcare insurance, you mentioned that you were speaking with one of your colleagues. You are a real estate investor, commercial and residential, right there in San Francisco. And you were talking about one of your colleagues on, in the real estate field, talking about his exorbitant cost of insurance for his family. And it made me think that, I always call you a Renaissance man, teacher, jazz musician, investor, so much more traveler, art appreciator, and, so much more, that a lot of the areas, a lot of those hats that you wear must kind of intersect. And I was just curious if, this might seem like a question from out of the blue, but if if your experience as a jazz musician, and you're still performing there with your sextet all the time there in San Francisco, if your experience as a jazz musician kind of filters into your decisions as a businessman, as an investor.
I'll take it a step further. Yes, it does, for sure. I in jazz, you improvise, and I'm a tough leader. And when one of my musicians plays something he played last week, I point to him and says, "Don't do that again." Every week, it's got to be new. Keep it coming. And in business, I shoot from the hip quite a bit. I sign documents without even reading them. I call my attorney. She says, "Now what did you sign?" She'll get me out of it. And I taught school by just waiting for some student to say something really interesting. And then I would jump on that, and then I would make that the center of the class. So the class was really engaged.
Did the principals appreciate your unique approach?
Yes. I had one principal did a year evaluation. They sat and watched me teach and says, "Mr. Parker, it's a little bit unorthodox the way you teach. I don't know what you're doing." It's not out of the book. But I've never been in a class where not a person is talking. You have completely mesmerized the class of paying attention to you, everything you're saying. And the level of your class is about 2 or 3 grades above grade level. So you're doing something right. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to put down extraordinary and let it go. I can't analyze what you're doing. And in business, I do that. And but it applies to my political economy. It's one reason I'm compelled to write. I read and write 3 to 5 hours a day. I have for the last 35 years. I've put in postgraduate work about 35,000 hours, concentrated study in political economy. Wow. Annotating texts. Because I just know intuitively, I've made 8 major predictions at the moment the event occurred, and they were all right.
Well, yeah,
it's all connected. I'm living in the moment in a sense. I'm functioning intuitively.
Yeah. Well, I also get a sense that you're. Only you would know, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I get a sense that you're really driven by a desire to make a difference in people's lives. You said that you're approached by students you had, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, and they're much taller now, of course. But, you said you'd have parent-teacher conferences and even offer some advice and guidance to the parents as well. San Francisco being such a melting pot and with such great diversity. And your essays in all 3 of your books are so meticulously documented. And you told me something funny the other day about your editor, who I guess, like you said, like me, is a liberal. What did he say about your writing?
Well, my editor is a Occupy Wall Street guy.
Oh, wow.
He's out there fighting for the activists, and he says he would never take somebody like me. He says, but he has to admit that my arguments are compelling, that I grab his attention and I back them up really well. I'm not saying some podcaster said this or some person said. I'm taking U.S. government, Congressional Budget Office numbers, Census Bureau office. I'm taking real government numbers, real serious, a Rand or Brookings or institution or Cato Institute. I'm taking real research and say, here. And he says he can't not edit me because I pass every test that he would want a writer. But he doesn't agree with anything I say.
Amazing. And, you mentioned how, in your jazz sextet there that I saw you, your group there at the Bear Bottle Brewery, which was really fun a couple of months ago. Loved that. You said you told one of your music colleagues, don't play the same improv, riff again or solo. Do you take that attitude to your investing as well? I mean, are you an optimist about investing? We read about, the changes in American cities and commercial real estate and stuff like that. Are you always evolving? I mean, how do you approach that?
I just have so much historical background that I know that cycles repeat, and it's always the same. go too far. Every recession is a product of overextension of credit. Always and only. That's what causes recession. So I just wait for a little crash. I'm making offers left and right on office buildings right now.
Wow.
I have no idea what I'm going to do with them if I get them. And I've just turned down 2. I got close and I panicked. Better deals are still coming. Better deals are still coming. I let it go.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine that America will one day not need cities anymore. I mean, I can't even imagine that. So
no, that'll turn around.
Yeah.
You can't just work in your pajamas from home and take the dog for a walk.
Exactly. Enough of
you got to go to work.
Zoom calls. Exactly. And so what are you doing musically for people who would like to know? I mean, we just have a short time right now, but where can people hear you perform?
Well, I perform every week in San Francisco for the last 20 years. Bear Bottle Brewery is the most fun. It's like there's dogs running around, kids running around, shuffleboard, there's video games, mothers nursing in the back room. It's a great environment. And I play at Fillmore Farmers Market at 10 o'clock in the morning on the first Saturday of the month. And I play at a Shiva Jazz Lounge first Wednesday of the month. Fun, always fun.
Love it. Yeah, well, highly recommended. I recommend it to everybody here. Go catch David and his sextet. They've headlined at the Fillmore Jazz Festival twice. So there you go. But I want to thank everybody for joining us for a San Francisco Conservative here on KSFO Radio. Make sure you catch David's column regularly in the Epoch Times. How's the response there, real quick, at the Epoch Times, David?
They told me they couldn't believe it. I'm getting so much response. At one time, I got 100 comments, written comments. They said for every comment, that's at least 100 people read it, because most people don't comment. So I had time. The paper has about 10,000 circulation.
Yeah,
I've had 10,000 readers. Everybody's been reading my columns this season.
Highly recommended. Be sure to pick up David's books and catch him in the Epoch Times. And thanks again for a great conversation. Thanks, David.
Okay, that's fun. Thank you.
Meet David Parker, a lifelong native of San Francisco, a true Renaissance man, educator, investor, and entrepreneur, jazz musician. David Parker is a San Francisco conservative. That's the title of his second book and this show, one that reminds us all just how precious our democracy really is. He's an optimist, and some of his views may surprise you. Parker's writing reminds us all that the study of history provides important perspective on current challenges. You can learn more about David Parker's writing by visiting davidparkeressays.com. On the website, you can also download a free chapter from Parker's book, A San Francisco Conservative. The impact of Parker's writing extends far beyond the city by the bay. Be sure to visit davidparkeressays.com to learn more and download a free chapter from his book. That's davidparkeressays.com.